You can support In the Past Lane by telling your friends about the podcast. Studies show that one of the top ways that people find new podcasts is by word of mouth. So please, talk it up. Thanks.
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more
to huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
Consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill.
That all men and women are created equal.
Give me liberty or give me death.
Nobody's free until everybody's free.
And the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Hi there. Welcome to In the Past Lane, the podcast about American history and why it matters. Brought to you by SBI, Snoring Beagle International, and coming to you from the Coal Mine Canary Studios, located in central Massachusetts. I'm your host, historian at large, Edward T. O'Donnell, and this is episode 196. Every week here at In the Past Lane, I tell you what happened in U.S. history this week with special attention to one important story. So what's happening in the Past Lane this week? Well, to be honest, things are really busy. Normally, for the typical college professor, June is a month of decompressing after a hectic semester, and attending to a lot of deferred work like cleaning one's office and starting new projects. There's plenty to do, but it's a slower pace and lower stress. But not this year. As chair of the history department, I am deeply involved in the planning for the fall 2020 semester. Basically, we're working on several scenarios, including one with no students on campus where we all teach online, or some students on campus and some staying at home and learning online. There's no chance we will have all of our students back on campus. And there are way more unknowns than knowns, so the planning is speculative at best. Anyway, that's the quick update. In other news, I'm baking a lot of bread, and my vegetable garden looks spectacular. All right, let's get on with it. Here's what happened this week in American history. Let's start with this. On Thursday, June 21st, 1877, 143 years ago this week, 10 men went to the gallows in Pennsylvania. They were known as the Molly Maguires, members of an ultra-secret society that used violence and intimidation in their bitter struggles with powerful mine owners. Arrested for their alleged role in several murders, they were convicted and sentenced to death on the basis of very thin evidence and questionable testimony. Black Thursday, as it was called, would long be remembered by residents of the Pennsylvania coal fields as an extraordinary example of anti-labor and anti-Irish prejudice. The story of the Molly Maguires was one very much rooted in two specific places: rural Ireland and the anthracite coal region of Pennsylvania. The latter was the main supplier of the nation's coal, making it a vital component in America's unfolding industrial revolution. By the 1870s, more than 50,000 miners, more than half of them Irish or Irish-American, toiled in the region's mines. It was hard, brutal work. They worked long hours for low pay in extremely dangerous conditions. Every year, cave-ins, fires, floods, and poison gas claimed the lives of hundreds of miners. In one fire alone in 1869, 110 miners were killed. It was in the struggle of these workers to improve their pay, hours, and conditions that the Molly Maguire saga began. Irish immigrants and Irish Americans played key roles in virtually every aspect of this conflict, from the lowliest miner to the most powerful capitalist. Foremost was Franklin B. Gowan, the wealthy Irish-American president of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. Tough and ambitious, he ruthlessly drove his competitors out of business in an effort to dominate the state's two principal industries, coal and railroads. The only thing he hated more than rival businessmen was organized labor, especially the main miners' union, the Workingmen's Benevolent Association. Led by an Irish-born man named John Siney, the WBA had won several strikes in the late 1860s and early 1870s that resulted in wage gains and union recognition. Even though he shared an Irish heritage with most of his miners, Franklin Gowan had little sympathy for them. In industrializing America, class interests trumped everything, including ethnicity and culture, and Gowan treated his workers like they were the enemy. Gowan waited for the right moment to attack, and that came in 1873 when the nation plunged into a severe economic depression that lasted until 1877. The hard times hurt his bottom line, but Gowan saw a silver lining. Hard times also provided an opportunity to kill the miners' union. In January 1875, Gowan announced a steep cut in wages, a move that was quickly followed by the region's other coal operators. This move triggered a massive miners' strike throughout the region that paralyzed coal production. But Gowan and the other operators had prepared for the strike by stockpiling huge coal reserves that allowed them to continue to sell coal while waiting out the desperate and half-starved striking miners. The long strike, as it came to be known, was doomed. It ended after 5 months in June with a total defeat for the workers and the destruction of the Workingmen's Benevolent Association. And here's where rural Ireland figured into the story. Embittered by their loss, a group of Irish miners turned to an old custom: extra-legal justice, or vigilantism. Irish tenant farmers had for centuries used tactics of intimidation, vandalism, and murder to protest landlord abuses, like rent hikes and evictions. These types of tactics of resistance by powerless peasants have been termed by the anthropologist James Scott the weapons of the weak. According to legend, the original Molly Maguire had been a woman who thwarted her landlord's attempts to evict her during the famine. Many of the Irish miners in the Pennsylvania coalfields came from counties in Ireland where periodic agrarian vigilantism was a firmly rooted tradition. Molly Maguire activity first appeared in the anthracite region in the labor disputes of the early 1860s, but it faded away with the WBA's success in gaining better wages and conditions for the miners. But now, in the wake of the defeat of the long strike, the Mollies returned with a vengeance. Between June and September of 1875, 6 people were murdered, all carefully targeted as agents of the mine owners and enemies of the miners. Having destroyed the WBA, Franklin Gowan saw in the return of the Mollies an opportunity to permanently wipe out any miner opposition to his plans to consolidate wealth and power. And so he unleashed a sweeping campaign against the secret society, in which he branded all labor activists as Molly Maguires. He also accused an Irish fraternal organization known as the Ancient Order of Hibernians of operating as a front for the organization. Eventually, over 50 men, women, and children were arrested and indicted for their alleged roles in the Molly Maguire violence and murders. Incredibly, the state of Pennsylvania played almost no role in this process. None other than Franklin Gowan served as the county district attorney and oversaw the investigation and prosecutions. A private company, the Pinkertons, conducted the investigation. A private police force employed by the mining companies carried out the arrests, and Gowan and coal company attorneys conducted the trials. As one historian commented, the state only provided the courtroom and the hangman. The first trials began in January 1876. They involved 10 men accused of murder and were held in the towns of Mock Chunk and Pottsville, Pennsylvania. A vast army of national media descended on the small towns. In an era of rising hysteria over labor radicalism and the growing popularity of socialism and anarchism, much of it fueled by sensational stories in the mainstream press, the Molly Maguire story proved irresistible, and the coverage was universally negative. The New York Times, for example, wrote about, quote, the snake of Molly Maguireism, while the Philadelphia Inquirer condemned the men as, quote, enemies of the social order. The key witness for the prosecution was yet another Irishman, James McParland. He was an agent of the infamous Pinkerton Detective Agency, an organization that would be more accurately described as a private army for hire that specialized in labor espionage and strike-breaking. Franklin Gowan had hired the Pinkertons in the early 1870s as part of his master plan of destroying the WBA. McParland had gone undercover to infiltrate the Mollies and gather evidence, and gather he did, or at least he claimed he did during the trials. On the stand, he painted a vivid picture of Molly Maguire's secrecy, conspiracy, and murder. With this testimony, combined with the fact that Irish Catholics and miners had been excluded from the juries, guilty verdicts were a foregone conclusion. All 10 defendants were convicted and sentenced to hang. And in order to send the most powerful message to the region's mining communities, authorities staged the executions on the same day, June 21st, 1877, in 2 locations. Alexander Campbell, Michael Doyle, Edward Kelly, and John Donahue were hanged in Mock Chunk, while James Boyle, Hugh McGeehan, James Carroll, James Rorty, Thomas Duffy, and Thomas Munley met a similar fate in Pottsville. Although the hangings took place behind prison walls, they were nonetheless staged as major spectacles that drew huge crowds and generated international news coverage, nearly all of it condemning the Mollies as murderous monsters who got what they deserved. Still, the Molly Maguire episode was far from over. 10 more miners would be tried, convicted, and executed over the next 15 months, bringing the total to 20. While evidence suggests that some of the men were probably guilty of murder, the great majority of those executed were likely victims of hysteria and a profoundly unjust legal process. In the end, Franklin Gowan and his fellow mine operators succeeded in stamping out the Molly Maguires, but not the violent clashes between labor and capital that they represented. For more than a generation following the executions, miners in Pennsylvania and many other states would continue to fight, both legally and extra-legally, against the oppressive conditions in the mines. And the mine owners, as they did with the Mollies, did their best to dismiss the agitation as foreign radicalism brought to America by misguided immigrants who did not understand the inherent goodness and justice of industrial capitalism. The miners, of course, knew better. They understood that unregulated capitalism, backed by the full weight of the law, the government, and the media, was neither just nor democratic. It was exploitation, pure and simple. Well, that's going to do it for In the Past Lane this week. You can learn more about me and everything we talked about at inthepastlane.com. And let's interact via social media. I'm at In the Past Lane on both Twitter and Instagram, and our Facebook page is In the Past Lane Podcast. See you next week.
SBI, Snoring Beagle International.